maybe for you. Welcome to the Humana Care webinar series. Excuse me. Today we'll be looking at the topic of forgiveness. So my name is Brian Haley. I'm a registered clinical counselor on the Sunshine Coast of British Columbia. And I'm happy to be here today and to be your presenter. So as I said, forgiveness is our topic, the heart's journey home. So what are our learning outcomes for today's webinar? Hopefully what you will leave with today at the end of this presentation. First, we're going to look at what forgiveness is not. Next, we're going to take a look at what forgiveness is, looking at the benefits of not forgiving, and of course the benefits of forgiveness itself. Then we'll look at how to forgive ourselves, which is a really important aspect of the whole forgiveness process, as we will see as we go along. And then, of course, how to forgive others. First, let's look at a definition. This is taken from the Greater Good website, a website that I highly recommend for everyone, too, that wants to look into this a little further. So first, what they're saying here is psychologists generally define forgiveness as a conscious, deliberate decision to release feelings of resentment or vengeance toward a person or group who has harmed you, regardless of whether or not they actually deserve your forgiveness. So that's kind of a broad definition, but quite a good one. So let's look at another one. Yes, I was going to mention this too, that there will be a few slides on here in today's presentation that you won't have in the slide package that was sent to you. I've added some graphics and some the odd joke and so on here and there. But the meat, excuse me, the meat of the presentation will definitely is here. So Martin Luther King said that forgiveness is not an occasional act, it is a permanent attitude. And that does take a little while to get our head around, a permanent attitude, because usually I think most of us, myself included, we think of, or we may have thought of forgiveness as being something that we forgive somebody and then that's it, it's over. But from what Dr. King is saying, this is something that we need to do on an ongoing kind of basis. And we will get into more of that as we go along as well. One last definition then. This is from Wikipedia. Forgiveness is an intentional and voluntary process by which a victim undergoes a change in feelings and attitude regarding an offense, letting go of negative emotions such as vengefulness with an increased ability to wish the offender well. Again, that's quite similar to the first one, but the last aspect there, the ability to wish the offender well, this takes some time because we'll see that forgiveness is really a process. It's not something that happens overnight. And this last aspect here, wishing the offender well, does take time in this whole process. So, what forgiveness is not? Just as important as defining what forgiveness is understanding what forgiveness is not. Forgiving someone doesn't mean forgetting or condoning or excusing or justifying the behavior of someone who has injured or offended us in some way, nor does it mean giving them room to hurt us again. Part of the process of forgiveness is acknowledging our wounds, giving ourselves permission to feel the pain, but also recognizing why that pain no longer serves us. And that's a key element, really. In the end, forgiving someone means making peace with what happened, letting go of the hurt, the resentment, so that we can heal and move on. Really, it's about me. It's not about them. And this is a key theme that we'll see coming up again during this presentation. It's also important to remember that it's a process. It's not magic. It takes time. Simply saying I'm sorry, then expecting everything to fade away and become sunshine and roses is not realistic. It's not going to happen that way. In fact, we might be angry and feel resentful feelings over and over again for some time. but ultimately we do have a choice. And we will explore how we can get to that choice point in this presentation as we go along. So first of all, let's look at what forgiveness is not. Forgiveness is not forgive and forget. And I think this is a common one that most of us have gotten caught in at different times in our life. Excuse me. Some people think that to forgive is to forget, but that's not true. Forgiveness doesn't mean that we forget the wrong that was done to us. It only means that we no longer hold feelings of vengeance or revenge toward that individual. It's difficult to forget the painful things someone has done to us, but forgiveness doesn't hinge on us forgetting the event. In fact, we can't forget, nor should we. In fact, the process of forgiveness may include the resolve to never allow this to occur again. It might include an intention such as this, where we say to ourselves, I will do everything in my power to protect myself and protect others and never let this happen again. Our next point is that forgiveness does not justify or condone. Many targets or victims carry the damage inside themselves for years, fearing that letting go of the hurt means that the offender got away with it. For some of us, forgiving an unrepentant bully or an offender seems to justify the person's actions or seems to trivialize or discount the hurt and damage that occurred. Forgiveness is not about justifying the offender's actions or discounting our hurt or our emotional pain. It does not mean we excuse the offender. This is not about excusing, justifying, or condoning. We do hold them responsible. We should hold them responsible. We're not saying that what was done to us was acceptable or unimportant or not so bad. No, it hurt. It was bad. In fact, true forgiveness cannot even occur while we are in any way denying, minimizing, or condoning the actions that harmed us. So, in fact, we could say, in a way, it's the opposite of condoning. Next, forgiveness does not mean that we need to reconcile. We don't need to consider rekindling the relationship. It's important to remember that forgiveness doesn't have to mean reconciliation with the individual who wronged us. We can forgive that individual without going back into a relationship that may be unhealthy or harmful. Some acts of damage or betrayal harm the relationship permanently. And I'm guessing that most of us today here listening have experienced that. But forgiveness does nothing to change that. We may find ourselves in a place where even after forgiveness, we do not feel safe relating to the offender. We might even be advised by others to stay clear of that person. Even in a situation like this, forgiveness can still take place. It's not about the other person, nor is it about our relationship with them. Sometimes in the process of forgiveness, a person who hurt or betrayed us may wish to make amends. But even this does not require us to put ourselves in the way of further harm. Let's give a little example in the form of a story here. In India, they believe that we should be kind and love all creatures without exception. This is a generalization, but it generally holds true. So the story is that once a small child came to his grandfather and asked, "Grandfather, if we are to love all creatures large and small, how do we love a cobra or a scorpion?" The grandfather smiled, thought about it for a minute, and said, "We love them by giving them lots of space and staying away from them." Next on our list, forgiveness is not sentimental or quick. We can't paper things over. Just smiling and saying, "I forgive you," does not work. Forgiveness is a deep process, and the deep process of the heart, which we'll explore in more detail as we go along. And in this process, we need to honor the betrayal to ourselves or to others close to us. We need to honor the grief, the anger, the hurt, or the fear that we experience as a result of some offense. Forgiveness is not a clear-cut, one-time decision. It takes a while. It's a process and a practice, actually, and it cannot be forced. The greater offenses coming to forgiveness, for the greater offenses, I should say, coming to forgiveness may include a long process of grief or anger or sadness and so on. Or it could include a combination of all of these. And here's a story that's somewhat related. I like it, so I'm going to tell it. A man sends a letter to Revenue Canada, and one of the clerks receives the letter and opens it up, and the letter starts off, "Dear Revenue Canada folks, I haven't been able to sleep since I cheated on my taxes last year. As a result, I've enclosed a check for $2,000. If I still can't sleep, I'll send the rest." So here's a quote by Robert Mueller: "To forgive is the highest, most beautiful form of love. In return, you will receive untold peace and happiness." That may seem like a stretch to some of us, but we'll see as we go along that there's actually scientific proof that backs that kind of thing up, that kind of a statement. And then on the other hand, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. We are the ones that get burned. And now a quote from Mahatma Gandhi: "The weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is the attribute of the strong." Forgiveness takes courage. It really does. It takes strength of character, and it's not for the weak, as Mahatma Gandhi said. Now, something on a little lighter side. "I am letting go of my resentment towards you for all the mean, nasty, and unforgivable things you have done to me, you lousy bum." And I think many of us have been in that place before. I know I have. Not so easy to forgive at times. So let's look now at what forgiveness is. Firstly, if we are to forgive, it's important to fully understand what forgiveness is, and also what it's not, which we just did. If we don't understand forgiveness, it's difficult to forgive someone, really. Forgiveness involves letting go of feelings of resentment and changing our thinking towards an individual who's wronged us. When we forgive someone, we no longer entertain thoughts of revenge. Forgiveness involves letting go of the ill will towards an individual who caused harm or injury to us in some way. So, letting go of the past. It's not about forgetting, as we touched on earlier, but it is definitely about letting go of the past. Someone once said, "Forgiveness is like letting go of all hope for a better past." It's done. It's the way it is. It's the way it was. We can't change the past. And when we truly let go of the past, we discover something. We discover that forgiveness is the gift at the end of the healing process. If we find it waiting for us when we reach a point where we stop expecting them to pay for what they did or make it up to us in some way, that's what we find at the end. So, as a little example of that, we may be still suffering terribly from some past event that happened that hurt us, while those who betrayed us might be on vacation on some tropical island, not a care in the world, not even slightly aware of what we're going through. You see, so it's us that suffers when we hang on to that and we don't let go of the past. And we'll get into more of this as we go along. So, forgiveness, what is it? Forgiveness is an opening of the heart. When we are bitter and resentful, our hearts are closed. So closed at times, in fact, that we can physically feel the tightness and the contraction in our chest. I know I have. I don't know about you. It's like our hearts turn into a small little hard and brittle walnut. Sometimes it's the things, however, that tear the heart open that are the most healing and purifying in the end. Often it is our vulnerability that is the key ingredient to our own healing. And in the spirit of openness, it is important to move beyond the always guilty other and the always innocent me or us. Am I always innocent? Am I always right? Moving away from black and white thinking is crucial to healing. We do this by questioning our own beliefs and convictions. And even if we can bring ourselves to engage in this process, please remember, we are not ignoring, forgetting, or condoning the behavior of the one who hurt us. Important to remember that. Forgiveness and compassion are not sentimental or weak. They demand courage and integrity. Yet they alone can bring about the peace we long for. That's from Jack Kornfield. We'll have some more quotes by Jack as we go along. Forgiveness is no longer wanting to punish the people who hurt us. It is no longer wanting to get even or to have them suffer as much as we did. It is realizing that we can never truly even the score. And it is the inner peace we feel when we stop trying to. We realize that nothing we do to punish them will heal us. More importantly, we see that these attitudes and behaviors have done the opposite. They have hurt us. We reach a decision point where we say, you know what, I've done enough hiding, enough hurting, enough hating. I do not want to do those things anymore. That's an important transition element. Next on our list, forgiveness is letting go of toxic emotions. We're going to touch on this topic 2 or 3 times in this presentation because it's so important. The toxic emotions like resentment, anger, vengeance, and the like, they're like poison to the mind and the body. The longer we hold on to these toxic emotions, the more likely it is that we will suffer serious health issues. Resentment is like swallowing poison and waiting for your enemy to die. That's from Nelson Mandela. Hatred and resentment have a tight grip on our psyche and heart. And the more one focuses on a problem, the more ingrained it becomes. I think we've all experienced that. Resentment has the potential to undermine our humanity, our integrity, and our capacity for compassion. It has the potential to eat away at our peace of mind and well-being. Holding on to resentment has a huge cost. Forgiveness results in a loosening of that grip, that tight grip. It generates space and creates the capacity to doubt, to modify, even to change our thinking. So this is a very powerful a couple slides here, graphics. And these slides here, these graphics are from the HeartMath Institute. By the way, all of the things that I reference are at the end of the presentation in terms of resources and sources, so anybody that wishes to follow up on it can do so. But these graphics here are very important because they're showing and supporting what I just said about the toxic emotions. So this particular graphic at the top shows the result of frustration on our heart rate variability. And as we can see, it's very chaotic and incoherent and imbalanced, really. But then when we look at the bottom graphic, appreciation, and these are basically bioenergetic feedback and scientifically proven. And the one on the bottom is, of course, a nice smooth sine wave of the heart rate variability when we are experiencing something like appreciation or joy or love or caring for somebody. And the difference here, of course, is in the frustration, and we could easily replace the word frustration with anger, resentment, vengeful feelings, that sort of a thing. It will have the same result. The graphic may not look exactly the same, but it will be very similar. And what that's showing is the imbalance that happens between our heart and our mind, our brain, and our whole physiology, the effect of the autonomic nervous system on the whole body. That's a result of that top slide. experiencing those kinds of emotions. Whereas when we feel and experience, and that's the important part, actually feeling the appreciation or the caring, gratitude, those sorts of things, it actually shows up scientifically in a bioenergetic feedback of our heart rate variability. So a couple more on what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is about me, not the other. Forgiveness is about our own healing. It's about bringing peace and release to our own heart, mind, and body. It's about letting go of our expectations of others. Here's an important question that we all might want to consider. Can I let go of how I or other people must behave? Forgiveness happens within us. It is a feeling of wellness and freedom and acceptance. Those feelings can be ours at any time as long as we want to truly heal and are willing to try. Excuse me a moment, I just lost myself in my slides here. Oh, here we go. Okay. Something happened unexpectedly. So yes, it's about letting go of our expectations of others. Here's another quote from Jack Kornfield. Forgiveness is the necessary ground for any healing. We no longer build our identity around something that happened to us in the past. The past, in fact, is put into its proper perspective, we could say. And we realize that the injuries and injustices that are a part of our life are really just a part of who we are rather than all of what we are. We are, all of us, more than our past hurts and injuries. Forgiveness allows us to move forward and to build on the positives in our life. Which leads us to the next point. Forgiveness is about moving on. Of course, before we can move on, it is vital to educate ourselves on what forgiveness is not and what it is, which hopefully we are making a good start on today. It's important to see and feel the suffering and the toll that not forgiving has had on us. It's essential for us to feel the weight of that. By forgiving, we free up and begin to put to better use the energy that was once consumed by holding grudges, harboring resentments, nursing unhealed wounds. I think if we just reflect on that for a moment, all of us can look to and remember and maybe even feel past experiences where we've done that and how much energy that takes from us, how much it saps our energy. And remember that a life well lived is, in a sense, our best revenge. It is discovering the strengths that we have always had and applying our capacity to understand and accept other people and ourselves. And we do all have that capacity. It is about breaking the cycle of pain and abuse, ceasing to create new victims by hurting others as we ourselves were hurt, or hurting ourselves, in fact. So moving on is about our own healing. It's about shifting our attention and our intentions toward setting positive goals for ourselves, rather than staying focused on the hurts of the past. Here's another quote by Jack Kornfield. Without forgiveness, our lives are chained, forced to carry the sufferings of the past and repeat them with no release. In fact, sometimes we just have to let things go. It's basically what Jack is saying there. Here's one from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. If we could read the secret history of our enemies, we would find in each person's life sorrow and suffering enough to disarm all hostility. But then we get back to that courage, the courage to really look into another person's life. And it does take courage to do that. Okay, so we're going to look next at the benefits of not forgiving. Before we do that, I have another little story for you. And this is a story of two prisoners who were talking after they were released after being in prison for many years. And after some time, the two met again. The first prisoner says to his fellow, "Have you forgiven your captors yet?" The second responds without blinking an eye, "No, no, I will never forgive them." The first one thinks for a bit and then responds, "Well, I guess they still have you in prison then." Sad but true, really. So now the benefits of not forgiving. The illusion that if this hadn't happened, we'd have a perfect life. So these are kinds of, I call them the benefits of not forgiving, but really they're illusory benefits. But we will look at them because it's important to note these. So not forgiving provides a readily available explanation or excuse for anything and everything that is wrong with us and our life. If only things had been different and we had not been hurt when we were, or by whom we were hurt, we would be so much better off than we are now. At one time or another, I think most of us have used this line of thinking to get us off the hook. If we do heal and forgive, however, we will not be able to use this reasoning anymore. The next is the illusion of being one of the good guys. What do I mean by that? Well, not forgiving helps us define who we are. We are the victim of some injury or injustice. We are the innocent ones. In this identification of victimhood, we are comforted by the fact that we are one of the good guys. Offender bad, me good. However, once we forgive, the world can never again be defined in such black and white terms. We will have to accept and deal with shades of gray. Third, the illusion of power, and this is a big one. I think this catches a lot of people up. I know it has for me in the past. Not forgiving helps us compensate for the powerlessness we felt when we were hurt. It's like we're keeping the offender locked away in a prison of our mind. When we do this, we can feel omnipotent, since no one can make us forgive or force us to stop holding a grudge. This illusion of power also includes the illusion of control, that by not forgiving, we are the ones in control. At least that's how it feels to us, doesn't it? Forgiveness means that we come to a place in our thinking and our feelings, well, we could say our maturity really, where we begin to realize that we cannot control others. And really, we never could. So we let go of this illusion of control as well. Next, the illusion that we won't be hurt again by not forgiving. So in this aspect, not forgiving protects us from being hurt again by the people or person who originally hurt us, or even by new people in our lives. By keeping the pain alive, keeping our eyes peeled for potential danger, keeping our guard up, we reduce the risk of ever again being rejected, deceived, abused, betrayed, or otherwise injured. But is that really true? Can we see the prison we create for ourselves when we see the world from this perspective? The reality is that this closes the heart and shields us from true intimacy in all of our relationships. So just so you know, these slides, or these points here, were taken from the Forgiveness book by Sydney and Suzanne Simon. And again, that's at the end of the presentation in the sources section for anybody that would like to read that book. I highly recommend it, actually. So we might ask ourselves, are the benefits of not forgiving worth the price we pay for holding grudges, harboring resentments, and hanging on to pain from the past? Is that sense of power we get from holding a grudge as satisfying as having the power to make our own choices? From the research that I've done, and based on my own personal experience, I would have to say that the life we have and the life we can hang on to by not forgiving is not nearly as fulfilling as the life we can create when we let go of the pain and we make peace with the past. So forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. We give this gift to ourselves. It's about us, not about the other person. And I think that's becoming clear as we move along, and hopefully will become even more clear. My life has been filled with terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened. Mark Twain. So let's look at the benefits of forgiveness now. When we're trying to figure out how to forgive someone, it helps to take some time to think about how forgiveness might profit us, how it might be advantageous for us. In fact, forgiveness will benefit us much more than the individual we forgive. Here are a few advantages of embracing forgiveness. Improves our overall health. Yes, we touched on that earlier, but now we can look at that in a little more detail. Studies have shown that when we forgive, it lowers our blood pressure. According to a study that was published in the Journal of Behavioral Medicine, forgiveness can actually lower our blood pressure. It also helps to reduce our heart rate and reduce stress, which benefits overall heart health. Other studies have shown that people who forgive are generally happier, healthier, live longer, have less occurrence of depression, and have lower levels of stress than those who hold resentments. That was taken from the forgiveness website, which is also at the end of the presentation. Forgiveness improves physiological coherence and balance, like those two graphics that I showed earlier, frustration and appreciation. A psychologist from Concordia University, who happens to be an expert on negative emotions like bitterness and regret, he and other experts have discovered that bitterness, which they defined as the failure to forgive, is essentially toxic. Bitterness is toxic. It harms our hormone and our immune systems, raises our blood pressure and cortisol levels, and when our cortisol levels are elevated, our entire physiology is stressed and in depletion. It's the fight or flight response, even when there's no real danger there. And I think most of us have experienced that from time to time. And in fact, the heart has its own neurons, just like in the brain. And when it is distressed or experiencing toxic emotions, it sends toxic messages to the brain, and then therefore the brain then sends that negative energy to the rest of the body, the rest of the physiology through the autonomic nervous system. And the result is a chaotic, imbalanced kind of energy that cascades through our whole body. So to summarize that, we could say that toxic emotions lead to emotional toxicity throughout the body, which then in turn leads to ill health. This is what incoherence in the system is. So therefore, when we get to a place of forgiving, we can bring ourselves to coherence and to balance and avoid some of these results. So forgiveness also results in healthier relationships. When we're able to forgive, whether it's someone else or ourselves, letting go of anger will result in healthier relationships, even a healthier relationship with ourselves. This happens as a natural result of opening our hearts. The dark cloud we create around our hearts through resentment and bitterness keeps it closed and in pain, just like the little walnut that we talked about earlier. As we learn to forgive, we feel a weight being lifted off our chests. Our hearts open to new possibilities. Our close relationships deepen because we are now more open. So it has a cascading positive effect. And in fact, we can experience less depression and stress. Letting go of anger and grudges, bitterness through forgiveness reduces our likelihood of depression. And according to the Mayo Clinic, forgiveness can result in fewer stress, anxiety, and depression symptoms as well. Next, which is really important, increases our sense of freedom. Well, all of these points are important, but this one truly nails the essence of it. When we are able to truly forgive, that is, completely let go of any feelings of resentment or vengeance toward the offender, at that moment we will begin to feel that a great weight has been lifted. Excuse me. We will begin to feel a true sense of freedom and peace. It is a sense of wellness, freedom, and acceptance. So what exactly are we free of? Well, most importantly, we are free of all the toxic emotions that we've been carrying around for who knows how long. Anger, resentment, bitterness, and so on, obsessing over someone or something that we cannot change. Most importantly, we are no longer allowing the offender or their actions to control us. Not being controlled by another is freedom. So here's a quick graphic to summarize the benefits and so on for us in terms of forgiveness. So as we can see, our blood pressure goes down, our immune system gets strengthened, chronic pain and illness drop, relationships are improved and deepened, and anxiety and depression are decreased. Not bad, I'd say. You have your way, I have my way. As for the right way, the correct way, and the only way, it does not exist. Friedrich Nietzsche. Next, we'll look at forgiving ourselves. Before we make a commitment to forgive others, we must first learn how to forgive ourselves for our own mistakes or for those times when we have hurt someone else. In many cases, we might find it harder to forgive ourselves than it is to forgive someone else. It can be very challenging to forgive others, or to forgive ourselves, sorry. But this is where forgiveness begins. In fact, I would venture to say that true forgiveness of others must begin with forgiveness of ourselves. When we develop more compassion for ourselves, we are able to handle life's everyday challenges and difficulties with more ease. In being merciful to ourselves, we become healthier, happier, more productive, and we open the door to forgiving others. Here's something we can all think on for a moment or reflect on. If we witness someone judging someone else the way we often judge ourselves in our heads, if we did that even for a few moments, I think most of us would be shocked, wouldn't we? I know I would. If forgiving yourself seems to be still to be a challenge, here are some helpful tips that we can begin that process with. So step one, begin by accepting our flaws. First, we need to begin by accepting our own flaws, to realize that we're not perfect. Everyone has flaws. Everyone makes mistakes. It's okay. As we focus on growing as individuals, acceptance of our own mistakes is the starting point that leads to forgiveness of ourselves. If we look honestly at our life, we can see the sorrows and pain that have led to our own mistakes. By doing this, hopefully, we can finally extend forgiveness to ourselves. Next step, we are more than our mistakes. It is very helpful to realize that we're still good human beings, even though we've made mistakes. Even when we mess up, it helps us to say to ourselves, this mistake does not define me. It's very important to not let guilt and shame eat us up inside. We may discover, in fact, that it's not necessary to be loyal to our suffering. We might find it useful to ask ourselves, are my mistakes what defines me? And I think we'll find that that's not true. The next step, take time to talk to someone. If we're still having a tough time forgiving ourselves, it can be helpful to take some time out to talk to someone about it. Talk to a good friend who can give us a different perspective, or we can talk to a professional therapist if we feel that forgiving ourselves is a bit more challenging than we first might have thought. Remember, though, there's no shame in reaching out for help. In fact, it may end up being the best thing we do for ourselves and for those close to us. The next step, take up mindfulness meditation or yoga. Both of these help us to relax, to bring calmness to our whole being. They help to calm our inner critic over time, of course. They help us to learn to accept our flaws. Mindfulness meditation especially helps us to see things as they are, rather than what we think they are or want them to be. Excuse me. And please remember that it is important to do this mindfulness meditation, that is, with loving kindness. Loving and kindness or compassion towards ourselves. And then that leads to loving kindness, compassion to others. And of course, forgiveness along with that. And when I talk about things like self-compassion or loving kindness towards ourselves, I'm not talking about being self-indulgent, really. It's about, it's rather the practical application of compassion and kindness. That's the way we could say it. Why? Because it helps us to forgive ourselves. It helps us to see that we are a human being that makes mistakes and that does not define us, and we can move on from that. And moving on from that means then we can, in turn, forgive others. And we have seen what some of the results of that are. The last step is to try the best friend test, what I call the best friend test. So to do this, we think about a mistake that we've made, then we ask ourselves, what would we tell our best friend if they made that mistake? Would we tell them that they couldn't be forgiven? Actually, what we probably say to our friend is, you know what, it's okay. Everyone makes a mistake from time to time. My invitation to you is, please take the advice that you would give your best friend. Forgive yourself. I'm going to skip past that one. We're starting to get near the end here, so let's see. One key result of mindfulness meditation, we'll look at that. It's what's called reaction and response. And reaction is really an unconscious reflex that happens without any conscious intervention or feeling of choice. And that's what we get caught up in most of the time. We're reacting from a place inside of ourselves that hasn't been looked at. Whereas a response indicates a conscious choice, regardless of the thoughts of our emotion that we may be experiencing. So mindfulness meditation and yoga to some degree, things like this, they help us to relax, but they also help us to get to this point where we can actually respond from a place of conscious choice rather than reacting from a place of an unconscious reflex. So here's a quick graphic of the flow of forgiveness, what I call the flow of forgiveness. So if we start like we've been talking about forgiving ourselves, when we do that, it leads to an opening of the heart. When our heart begins to open more, we create space in there. We begin to get to a place where we can then forgive others, begin the forgiveness process. As we do that, we get to a place where we experience a sense of freedom. And that sense of freedom leads us to a place where we get to more tolerance and acceptance of ourselves and others. And of course, then that leads back to forgiving ourselves and so forth. Forgive not because they deserve forgiveness, but because you deserve peace. Remember, it is about us. So finally, steps for forgiving someone else. Be inspired by forgiveness stories. If we're trying to forgive someone, we can be inspired by others who have forgiven individuals who hurt them. When we see others forgive, it's easier for us to let go and forgive someone who has injured us. When we develop this capacity, we might even find ourselves in a position of wanting to reach out and help others. I'm just going to read a short story from this is from The Art of Forgiveness, Loving Kindness and Peace by Jack Kornfield, who I've quoted a couple times here. This is a short story, but it's actually quite powerful. True story, too. Roberto Di Vicenzo, the famous Argentine golfer, once won a tournament, and after receiving the check and smiling for the cameras, he went to the clubhouse and prepared to leave. Some time later, he walked alone to his car in the parking lot and was approached by a young woman. She congratulated him on his victory and then told him that her child was seriously ill and near death. DiFacenzo was touched by her story, and he took out a pen and endorsed his winning check for payment to the woman. "Make some good days for the baby," he said, as he pressed the check into her hand. The next week, he was having lunch in a country club when a PGA official came to his table. "Some of the guys in the parking lot last week told me you met a young woman there after you won the tournament." DiFacenzo nodded. "Well," said the official, "I have news for you. She's a phony. She's not married. She has no sick baby. She fleeced you, my friend." "You mean there is no baby who is dying?" said DiFacenzo. "That's right." "Well, that's the best news I've heard all week," said DiFacenzo. Powerful story. So our next step is to make peace with the past. I think most of us have heard what's called the Serenity Prayer, and it outlines two paths to well-being. So I'm going to paraphrase here now. "Please grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference." So both of those aspects require forgiveness. Buddhist teachings say, suffering comes from failure to accept what is. And we touched on this a little earlier. And this doesn't mean that what is was right or fair, but accepting the reality of what happened in the past helps clear our path to positive action in the future. That's the critical thing there. We're not saying that it's right or that it's fair, but it is what it is. And the quicker we can accept that, then the sooner we can move on to positive action in our life. The third step, to be aware of the internal as well as the external. Bitterness is about blaming others for life situations. Regret comes from blaming ourselves. Letting go of bitterness requires the courage to forgive others and take responsibility for our own life from this day forward. That's the external. Letting go of regret requires forgiving ourselves. This is a key but commonly overlooked piece of the puzzle. And as we've touched on earlier, this is the internal component. While we can understand our past helplessness in the face of harm, especially in childhood, we may still need to forgive ourselves on some level. We might say to ourselves, I did the best I could at the time. Forgiving ourselves for not being able to protect ourselves often removes a huge obstacle to the healing. Step 4, learn to be empathetic. Although we may never fully accept how another person has hurt us, it helps to learn to be empathetic towards that person, thinking and feeling about what it's like to be in that person's shoes. Now that's a tall order, but it's also an important aspect of the process of forgiveness. When we learn to be empathetic, we may understand why that person acted the way he or she did, even if it hurts us to do that. Abraham Lincoln once said, "I've always found that mercy bears richer fruits than strict justice." Yes, sorry about that. Resentment is like drinking poison and then hoping it will kill your enemies. Nelson Mandela. Powerful quote. So step 5, develop the practice of forgiving quickly. Can we learn how to not carry a grudge, especially for little hurts? Important question to ask ourselves. Grudge releasing is a specific skill that can be learned with practice. First, we must become aware when our internal self-talk is focused on the grudge or past hurt. Once we bring it into conscious awareness, the next step is to practice self-talk that helps us to let go of it. Things like, "That's not good for me. It keeps me spinning in my own misery. I choose to release the hold this grudge has on me." Sounds easy, but like our first steps at learning any new skill, our efforts to release a grudge are usually pretty weak at first, but we'll get there with trying and practice. Well, the initial injury may have been out of our control. The only thing we do have control over now is how we respond to it. And this is what will determine the quality of our life going forward. Step 6, eliminate negative feelings. And we've touched on this already with the toxicity and so on. I think for the sake of time, I'll move on to the next step. Ask for help if needed. This is an important point as well. In some cases, it may be difficult to figure out how to forgive someone on our own, especially if the person hurt us repeatedly or the hurts were very traumatic. We might need some help to work through our feelings. In this case, a professional therapist can help us through the process of acknowledging our feelings and working through the process of forgiveness. And remember that we are not alone in this. Even therapists seek professional help. I mean, on a personal level, a few years ago, I was stuck myself in some really strong resentment and anger toward an old business associate who had stolen thousands of dollars from me through deceit and trickery. And no matter how I tried, I could not seem to let it go on my own, even though I knew it was necessary. I sought professional help myself, and gradually I was able to work through the bitterness. And in the process, I learned the power of forgiveness. A huge lesson for me. Speaking about professional help, the client says to the therapist, "I think I'm cured. I now forgive my parents, love my wife, adore my children, and hate you." So he's managed to shift it. Well, it's a start, I guess. What about when it's us that needs forgiveness? What if we're the one who has hurt someone else? We may be wondering how to get someone to forgive us. There's no way we can make someone forgive us, however. But we can go to the person we hurt and apologize. However, we cannot force forgiveness. We can let them know how we feel badly that we hurt them and ask them to forgive us. At this point, we've done everything we can to make things right. They must make the decision to forgive us. If they don't, we can be at peace knowing that we've done what we could to make things right. So, forgiveness is the key to freedom. So what have we learned today? We've learned what forgiveness is not. We've learned what forgiveness is. We've touched on the benefits of not forgiving, or the illusory benefits, we could say. We've looked at the benefits of forgiveness itself, how to forgive ourselves, which is such an important piece and an important part of the whole forgiveness process. And then, of course, how to forgive others. And here's the sources and resources, as I've mentioned, that I've used for this presentation. For anyone that would like to delve further into this topic, these are some good sources for you to begin with. Yes, and I would like to say about these slides, the additional slides that I've added on top of the ones that you have, which is kind of the meat of the presentation. If anybody would like the entire presentation, then please don't hesitate to ask. You can get a hold of Humana and then we'll make sure that we get that to you. So thank you for your time and attention. Again, my name is Brian Haley. I'm a registered clinical counselor in British Columbia. Thank you for your attention. I hope it was helpful for you. You can contact Humana directly with any questions you may have, any input and so on in these ways, email and 1-800 numbers and so on. So thank you again, and hope the rest of your day goes well. Bye for now.